Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into modern behavioral psychology to look at the actual nuts and bolts mechanics of sustained personal transformation. We are going to look at exactly how you can engineer your own discipline. So no more relying on that fleeting burst of inspiration. We are talking about structured, automated success. Let's just dive right in.
Okay, so this brings us to a universal pain point. Why is it that our goals always seem to stall out the second that initial excitement fades? I mean, we have all been there, right? You set a big goal, you feel incredibly pumped up for a few days, and then, boom, the momentum completely crashes. Well, modern research tells us exactly why this happens. It comes down to something called the planning fallacy and an inevitable crash in dopamine. See, your dopamine spikes when you just think about a goal, but it drops off a cliff when the hard work of execution actually begins. But don't worry, we're going to see exactly how to fix that.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover why motivation is not enough, the inner rocket launch concept, the rocket fuel matrix, two different approaches to confidence, the energy and focus axis, and finally, how to automate your daily discipline.
All right, Section 1. Motivation is not enough. The willpower myth.
So a lot of early self-help advice leaned really heavily on this idea of transient emotional inspiration. Just hype yourself up. But modern behavioral science, it completely pushes back on that. It proves that motivation is just a temporary feeling, whereas discipline is a systemic structure. We literally need this structural scaffolding just to survive the everyday friction of daily life. And the research points out something super fascinating here. Procrastination is rarely just a simple time management issue. It's actually an emotional regulation problem. We avoid tasks because we're trying to dodge the short-term negative feelings tied to them, things like anxiety, boredom, or self-doubt. So the main takeaway, you absolutely cannot just will yourself out of procrastination. You have to build a system around it. Moving on to Section 2, the inner rocket launch, structuring the mind.
To really grasp this systemic structure, we turn to Christopher R. Ashley. He's a secondary history and special education teacher, and it was actually his deep understanding of executive dysfunction and cognitive load theory that inspired his 2025 book, The Rocket Fuel Motivation and Discipline Manual. Ashley argues that launching yourself toward a goal isn't just some spontaneous event. Just like launching a literal aerospace vehicle, it takes a whole internal crew. First, you've got the dreamer. They set the long-term vision, the optimism, and the legacy. Then you have the planner, who's in charge of organizing resources, timelines, and execution. And finally, the engineer. The engineer manages your physical energy and repairs the system when it inevitably breaks down. You absolutely have to coordinate all three of these inner roles if you want to get off the launch pad.
Which brings us to Section 3, the rocket fuel matrix, which functions as a diagnostic tool.
Now, the rocket fuel framework actually spells out a 10-letter acronym, but we're going to focus on 4 of its absolute core pillars today: resilience, focus, execution, and legacy. And this isn't just some catchy title for a book. It's a highly practical diagnostic rubric. Think of it like this. If you start treating your behavioral failures like engineering flaws, you can systematically fix them without ever having to rely on pure willpower. For example, let's say you start out fast but you always fade out. Well, you need to look at R for resilience to build up some cognitive recovery protocols. Or if you're constantly getting distracted, you diagnose that issue under F for focus. That means you need better environmental design to minimize cognitive interference. It is a totally modular, step-by-step way to troubleshoot your own habits.
By connecting different elements of this matrix, specifically confidence, focus, and execution, Ashley outlines a coordinated 3-step process to just completely neutralize procrastination. Step 1, lower the entry threshold. Basically, break those massively intimidating projects into tiny, bite-sized tasks. Step 2, apply environmental control by ruthlessly removing physical and digital distractions. And Step 3, trigger pre-committed action plans. When you stack these 3 steps, you entirely bypass that initial anxiety that triggers procrastination in the first place. You're no longer sitting there deciding whether to work, you're just following the engineered system you already set up.
Section 4. 2 approaches to confidence: cognitive versus structural.
To really highlight how unique Ashley's methodology is, it helps to compare it directly to another big 2025 book, in this case, Highly Confident by Julie Gracie. Now, Gracie takes a very cognitive approach. She focuses a lot on interpersonal assertiveness, altering self-limiting beliefs, and stopping apologizing. It's heavily based on cognitive reframing, meaning you change how you think in order to change how you act. Ashley, on the other hand, takes a structural, action-first approach. He draws pretty heavily on his theatrical background at the Stratford Festival to advocate for state management. This means systematically performing your habits even when your enthusiasm completely tanks. In his model, the competence you gain from completing small, planned actions is what naturally builds your confidence from the ground up.
All right, let's look at Section 5, the energy and focus axis, managing your bandwidth.
Okay, so here is a major trap that literally all of us fall into at some point, the planning fallacy. This is our natural human tendency to chronically underestimate the time, the energy, and the resources actually needed to complete a task. And what does that lead to? Overexertion and eventually complete burnout. The rocket fuel framework emphasizes that true knowledge isn't just about knowing how to do a task. It requires a relentlessly realistic audit of your available time and your cognitive resources. Basically, you have to know your exact limits before you can push them.
Here's the thing. Your physiological bandwidth completely dictates your psychological focus. Using selective attention is incredibly taxing on your prefrontal cortex. So if your physical energy is depleted, your focus drops and your execution halts entirely. It's just biology. You have to manage this energy access by matching your heavy cognitive tasks to your natural peak energy hours. You also need to implement realistic pacing with built-in physiological recovery time. The goal is to prioritize consistent, daily progress over those exhausting, high-intensity bursts that just leave you completely drained.
Finally, Section 6, automating your daily discipline, the launch.
So how do we actually bring all of this structural scaffolding into our everyday lives? Check out this specific if-then implementation protocol. It takes a vague, usually guilt-inducing goal like, I really need to study, and translates it into a hard automated trigger. Something like, if it is 8 a.m. on Monday, then I will open my textbook and work at my desk for 50 minutes. This totally removes the need for in-the-moment willpower, which is fantastic because let's be honest, absolutely nobody has willpower at 8 a.m. on a Monday anyway. What you're doing here is automatically bridging the gap between your intention and your action.
To make sure you can start applying this stuff immediately, here are the core, actionable execution tools you should take away from this explainer. First, use a systemic gap analysis. When a project stalls out, rate each element of the framework from 1 to 10 so you can isolate exactly where your system is breaking down. Second, use those if-then protocols we just talked about to automate your habits. And third, start conducting weekly energy audits. Track your physical, mental, and emotional bandwidth to make sure you're always aligning your hardest work with your highest energy levels.
Now, what ties this entire engine together is the concept of legacy, which is deeply informed by Ashley's background as a history teacher. By writing out a specific legacy statement for your major projects, you align your daily habits with a much longer-term societal impact. And this creates a really powerful self-reinforcing loop. Because when you view your immediate actions through a much broader historical lens, your daily setbacks stop feeling like these crushing personal failures, and they start feeling like meaningful, manageable challenges. It fundamentally protects your resilience.
Which leaves us with this final critical thought to consider. We've seen exactly how to shift away from emotion-driven motivation toward a deeply automated, structured discipline. The diagnostic tools, the energy audits, the if-then protocols. Your structural scaffolding is fully ready. The only question now is, are you prepared to ignite the engine and launch the legacy you are actually capable of? Will you finally stop relying on fleeting dopamine and start actively engineering your own success?